And welcome. Well, I'm Nolan Dalla. Welcome to one of the most anticipated shows I've done maybe ever. If you're like me, you love football and you love Monday Night Football. And I've been watching Monday Night Football since I was, 8 or 9 or 10 years old. I think Monday Night Football started in 1970. And last night was the very first Monday night of the 2020 NFL regular season. And that was the 51st year of Monday Night Football. So I think it's a really good time to look back on Monday night on the golden anniversary plus 1 year and talk about our favorite, or my favorite and least favorite announcers that have been in the booth in Monday Night Football. And I can't think of a better guest. I guess I told him earlier I was the play-by-play. Well, here's my color guy today. And I got the best color guy in the business, Paul Harris from St. Louis. Paul, nice to see you.
Hi, Nolan. Proud to be here.
Great. And you've, we talked before the show, and you mentioned that you've actually interviewed some of these people. So I'm not going to be kind to a few of the people that you know and you've interviewed. But you're like me. You've watched Monday Night Football, I'm guessing, since its inception back in, 1970, yes?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was thrilled when it started. And I don't watch every week. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But yeah, I have interviewed a few of the guys who have been in the booth over the years, but I haven't been in touch with any of them in a long time. And they were guests on radio shows, not pals of mine. So go ahead and slice them up. I don't care.
All right. We are going to slice them and dice them. I'm going to give you my bottom. I think there's just been something like 60 different announcers, and some of them just did 1 or 2 games, or there were sometimes where there was Monday Night Football and there'd be 2 games on a Monday night. So you'd have people that just did really like 1 game their whole career. Monday Night Football crew did some playoff games for a few years, but we're going to basically talk about the core announcers that most people remember. Certainly if you go back as far as we do. Paul, let's first of all talk about Monday Night Football. And the year of the AFL NFL merger was 1970, and coincidentally, that's when NFL football went to prime time on ABC. Talk about the genesis of Monday Night Football and really what was the goal when it was first put on the air.
Well, Pete Rozelle, who was the visionary commissioner of the NFL for decades, he actually wanted to have it on TV in prime time as early as 1963, 1964. He couldn't get the networks to do it. There had been an attempt to put it on the Dumont network in the 50s for Saturday nights, and then the Dumont network went belly up, so that went away. But Rozelle was sure that putting TV coverage in prime time of NFL games would bring in a big audience. He did get a game or two a season on CBS for 4 years of the NFL, the old NFL. And then he got 2 games a season on NBC, which was the AFL network. That was in the years between 1966 and 69. And those experiments did well enough and drew big enough crowds that in 1970, he wanted to put it on a weekly basis. But NBC and CBS considered themselves too successful in prime time to give over that many hours to any sporting event. There was no live primetime coverage of anything. You know, the NBA didn't get primetime coverage until decades later. I can remember the 1970 NBA finals were broadcast live on the radio and tape delayed until midnight on the East Coast where I lived on ABC. The game was over before it started. That's how bad TV was when it came to prime time access for football. ABC at the time was the 3rd rated network. They were in the cellar. They didn't have anything good on the air. So they considered it. But Rozelle also went to a really, really rich guy who you remember by the name of Howard Hughes. One of the many things that Howard Hughes owned, in addition to the Desert Inn in Las Vegas and all the other stuff that gets covered in the movie The Aviator with Leo DiCaprio. One of the things that he owned was a thing called Hughes Sportsnet. And Rozelle and Hughes had face-to-face conversations about putting primetime NFL games on Hughes Sportsnet. The problem that they had was that a lot of ABC affiliates wanted the games and were going to preempt ABC's primetime programming to take the feed from Hughes Sportsnet. And the people high up at ABC, including one guy named Brune Arledge, said, why are we letting somebody else take control of this? If it's going to go on our affiliates, we'll do it ourselves. Brune, like Roselle, was a visionary and saw the possibility of what this could be, especially if you turned it into a huge party event, which is how it was promoted from the very beginning. That whole notion of, are you ready for some football? It's a Monday night party. That was how they did it, and that's how it kicked off in 1970.
Yeah, great history lesson. A lot of things I didn't know there. I didn't realize there were primetime games before 1970. And you're right. Monday Night Football is, or it was, an event. It transcended sport back a long time ago. I don't think it does anymore. We're going to get to the reasons why I think it's gone, frankly, downhill. And I'll get your opinion on that, and maybe the opinion of people who are watching who can type in on Facebook Live any questions and comments, and we'll try to get to those about midway through the show. Now, what I've done is I've compiled my list of, I'm not going to make this absolute, bash, attack mode show, but I did want to take, in my view, a few what I consider to be the worst announcers in Monday Night Football history. And I have essentially 4. Now, maybe you want to add to this, Paul, at the end. I'd like you to come on each one as I go. The very first one I'm going to give you, by the way.
Before you jump into this.
Go ahead.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Because we're going to go through lists of the guys who've been in the booth for the last 50 years, both play-by-play and analysts. But I would like to give a special shout-out to the guys who did the early game on ESPN last night. That's Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit, who are part of ABC's college football core. They do games there every Saturday. They were called in because it's the doubleheader night, NFL kickoff weekend. They always do 2 games on Monday Night Football. And so Fowler and Herbstreit were called in. I think that they are both terrific. Fowler, by the way, had just come off doing the men's and women's finals of the U.S. Open on Saturday and Sunday, and he had to switch gears and turn into a football guy for Monday, which he's very good at. I thought that the two of them were good. I thought Fowler is in every sport I've seen him in, terrific play-by-play guy. He sets up Herbstreit too, and he's a good analyst. So they're not going to be on our list because they're not considered officially Monday Night Football announcers, but I wanted to give them a shout out because I thought they did a very good job last night. Yeah,
excellent point. And the reviews were very strong on those two, and that was something that it really leads into the way it was before and how the announcers have changed. By the way, before I bring in now my worst, say 4 or 5, color commentators versus play-by-play, and then there's sideline announcers, studio hosts as well. We're pretty much going to stick with the color and the play-by-play people here, but they do have very different roles in the booth. Isn't that correct, Paul?
Yes, they do. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me give you now my countdown. By the way, this is, for me, the one I'm going to give you right now. This is kind of weak in my view. This is the one that everybody just doesn't seem to care for, and that's Dennis Miller. And Dennis Miller was on the air, I think about 2 or 3 years, got absolutely trashed by the critics and by a lot of the fans. And by the way, this has nothing to do with Dennis Miller's politics or anything else. Dennis Miller dances to a different beat, talks to a different drummer. He's a very, I guess, an acquired taste. And the idea about Dennis Miller is that he just didn't fit. Now, I like Dennis Miller. I like his comedy. I think he's very witty, very bright. And for whatever reason, maybe that didn't translate to the Monday night atmosphere or party, what have you. This is a very reluctant pick on my part. I probably would not put Dennis Miller on this list, except probably people would turn me off right now and say, what do you mean you don't have Dennis Miller as one of the worst announcers? So I'm going to bend to public pressure and say Dennis Miller maybe belongs there. What do you think?
I think the phrase you're looking for is Dennis Miller sucked.
Okay.
He was good as the anchor on Weekend Update on SNL. He was good as a stand-up comedian for many years. But when he was put in the booth, he was the guy who doesn't know what he's talking about, but wanted to make you think he was smarter than everybody in the room. And that was absolutely not going to be possible. Bad call by the executives to put him in that situation, an impossible task for him, and he still failed.
All right. I'm so glad you're not holding back, Paul. Now we're really gonna fight, because this is your buddy from St. Louis. I know you worked in New York and in Washington and all these other huge markets, but I know you're also a St. Louis guy. And Dan Dierdorff, he was on Monday Night Football for, I believe, 12 years. I believe I have that right.
Yep.
12 years, Monday Night Football, Dan Dierdorff, great offensive lineman, Hall of Famer, no question about it. Just never thought, first of all, he always kissed the referees' asses, never had the balls to make a call like they blew the call or the coach blew that. He never would be critical. He was always a kiss ass, always kissing up to everybody. That's my criticism of Dan Dierdorff. Agree or disagree?
Nolan, I don't know if you know this, but Dan Dierdorff has been right about everything he's ever said. And if you don't believe me, just ask him. And on Monday Night Football, he was way over the top. It's a shame, because I think he actually, by accident sometimes, slipped in some interesting insight. But as a guy who had so many years in the trenches, which just wrecked him physically, he, I think, felt like he had to be the anti-Dennis Miller, if you will, by pretending that he knew everything. And that didn't work for him. It just didn't work with his persona. He's a guy who, in most of the rest of his life, is probably a go along to get along kind of guy. I don't know him that well personally. We worked together in the same building, and I saw him every once in a while. But on Monday Night Football, I think it was his ego that was speaking more than anything else.
All right. Well, what in the hell do we know? He was only on the air for 12 years. So, I mean, he's obviously doing something right.
Yeah.
John Gooden. Oh, my goodness. Now, I know he's on the sideline of the Raiders now. He won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. Before that, he was with the Oakland Raiders. But my goodness, this is one that you had to turn down the sound when he was on. And by the way, I used to watch Monday Night Football here in Las Vegas with fans, and they'd blare it up in the casino, and you could hear his voice. And I try to remember anything he's ever said. I don't know how in the hell he's a head coach based on what I've seen him say in the booth. Agree or disagree?
I disagree. This will be our first disagreement. Right. I don't think Gooden was one of the best, but I don't think he was one of the worst. And that picture that you have up there of Gooden with Mike Tirico, I thought that they had terrific chemistry. When we get to the play-by-play guys, Tirico will probably be near the top of my list for play-by-play guys, and he did it for many, many years. He was very good at setting up Gooden, and I think Gooden was one of the coaches, one of the analysts who really excelled in being able to tell you what was about to happen, because he was so good at reading defenses and reading offenses in much the same way that Tony Romo does it for CBS Now. Now, Gooden was too often tended to use ridiculous slang or using the actual names of certain plays that went over the heads of average fans or even casual viewers. And I think that's an important thing we need to talk about. Monday Night Football's success did not come from hardcore football fans. It came from drawing in average and less than average casual fans who wanted to be part of this party on Monday nights. And by the time you got to the X's and O's with John Gooden, some of that went over the heads of quite a few people. But otherwise, as a football fan myself with a little bit of knowledge of the game, I enjoyed his analysis. All
right. Well, we have a fair disagreement. Real quick sidebar on Gooden. If I was with a group of guys and I was watching the game, I wouldn't mind, having a beer with him, so to speak. That's fine. I think he's, obviously a very amiable, likable guy. I think I just expected, again, based on this persona, I guess maybe I expected a little more personality in the booth. I just don't think we ever got that. Any closing thoughts on that?
How about if you were in a situation in a sports book where you had in-game betting and you just were betting on was the next game going to be a pass or a run? Yeah. If you have John Gooden next to you, I bet you beat the bookies.
Yeah, I'll take Romo, but maybe Gruden's a close second there. Fair point, Paul. All right, my absolute worst of all time. I almost need to stand up and rant on this one because I absolutely loathe this announcer, this writer, this guy, and he's still on the air on ESPN. I don't understand that at all. How in the world Tony Kornheiser ever got a job as a Monday Night Football analyst is completely baffling to me. First of all, it was very clear that Tony Kornheiser did not want to be there. For people that love football, love Monday Night Football, that is a dream job. Can you imagine flying around the country, first class, 17 weeks of the year? You're going around from stadium to stadium, going to the best hotels, meeting all the players, and he was bored. And he would say he was bored. He would say he hated to travel. And all the gibberish that you get from this guy on the air was he talk about his fantasy football pool, or just absolutely worse than zero, and a distraction. Tony Kornheiser is mindless, awful, and I don't like Tony Kornheiser anyway. When I heard that he was on the selected for 3 seasons, 3 unbearable seasons, I was completely livid. It's still 14 years later. I don't understand this one at all. My absolute worst, Tony Kornheiser.
Putting Tony on Monday Night Football was definitely a mistake. And I say this as a guy who knew Tony when I worked in Washington, D.C. radio. You were there at the time,
yeah.
In the 80s and 90s. Tony was the premier sports writer along with Mike Wilbon, who he still does, pardon the interruption, with on ESPN. They were the 2 premier sports writers at the Washington Post. And Tony also had a column for a while in the style section. He was funny and really, really clever. And I loved having him as a guest on my radio show. Later, he and I were on the same radio station for a short while. He was a wonderful guy. But, and that's capital B, capital U, capital T, you're right. Tony hated to travel. As much as John Madden hated to fly, Tony hated to travel anywhere. If he had to go outside the Beltway, it was a horrible day for Tony. That being said, putting him in the booth in those years with Joe Theismann, who was also not very good at his job, these 2 guys, and I know this from my DC history, Tony Kornheiser and Joe Theismann literally hated each other, Nolan.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I mean, vitriolic distaste. How would you like to be hired for a once-in-a-lifetime job and thrown in a booth with a guy who, I'm not sure that either of them has a mortal enemy, and if Joe Theismann does, it's probably Lawrence Taylor. But these 2 guys absolutely did not like each other. And if you don't have the ability to at least fake good chemistry, if you don't actually have it, but you can't fake it in the booth, it's never going to work. So again, putting Tony in there, I think, was a mistake. Putting Tony in there with Joe was a worse mistake. How he lasted 3 years, I don't know. But unlike you, I'm a Tony fan. In fact, right before we did the show, I have, pardon the interruption, on my DVR every day. I watch the boys every single day, and I love the chemistry of the 2 of them, just as I did 30 plus years ago.
Well, again, they're doing something right, again, because they've been on the air for so long. I'm talking about, pardon the interruption, I've been in Atlantic Studios there. It's right by the Capitol. It's just north of the Capitol. And by the way, why do Theismann and Kornheiser dislike each other? They're both from Washington and have been in that market for a long time. What's the story on that?
I knew at some point, but I don't know anymore. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Or if you know, you can't tell, which I respect.
No, I would tell you. Like I said, none of these guys are my friends.
Okay. Well, let's get to your work.
I may have known at some point, but I just don't remember.
Yeah, fair enough. So what is your, you can give us 1, 2, 3, however many you like, your bottom of the barrel Monday Night Football announcers from Paul Harris.
Okay. All right. There are 3 more that I think you skipped. One was Alex Carris.
Okay.
Who, if he has a personality, no one knows where it is. And it certainly never came out on the air. He never said a single insightful thing. He never educated the audience in any way. And this one, I do have a little bit of a bitter taste in my mouth because somewhere along the way, maybe it was while he was doing it or right after he left Monday Night Football, Alex Carris wrote a novel called Tuesday Night Football. And when I say he wrote, I mean he had an idea for a book and somebody else wrote it, ghost wrote it, and his name went on it. And in those days, I had him as a guest on my show. His publisher asked me, would you like to have him on? And I thought, oh, great, Alex Carris. I loved him in Paper Lion, the George Plimpton story that was turned into a movie starring Alan Alda. Yeah. I loved him as Mongo in Blazing Saddles. And now he's done Monday Night Football and he's got a novel. This will be interesting. What's the opposite of interesting in your mind?
Oh, wow.
The answer is Alex Carris.
Wow.
Yeah, he was boring. He was terrible. And Nolan, you know that I've said this to you many times. I can interview anyone about anything for 10 minutes. The only ones I can't talk to for that long are all dentists and all actuaries and all Alex Carrises.
Okay. Wow, you beat up Alex Carris, and by the way, I think he made my list of people I like. But go ahead, give us
really?
Some more. That's all right.
Okay,
I'll tell you why in a little bit. Go ahead.
The other two would be Joe Namath.
Okay.
Who, even though I was a Jets fan when they won the Super Bowl in what was it, 70? 71?
69.
69, okay.
Yeah.
The Joe Namath halo wore off very quickly for me. In fact, I wrote a piece last year about I don't understand why Joe Namath is still being hired to do television endorsements for some kind of product. So I don't know if they're for old people's medicine or reverse mortgages or I don't know what it is, insurance, something that he's doing. But who in the year 2020 is thinking, let me get a football hero from 50 years ago who was really only popular in the Northeast? You know, people here in St. Louis, they didn't give a damn about Joe Namath.
He was drafted by the Cardinals, by the way, but go ahead.
But he came to fame as Broadway Joe, not Gateway Arch Joe. Like Alex Carris, he was bad in the booth. The drunken night where he tried to kiss Susie Colbert was essentially the nail in the Joe Namath Monday Night Football coffin. And then the third one we have to mention here is O.J. Simpson.
Oh, wow.
Who for a while was really hot. I mean, this is a guy who had an acting career for a while. I mean, even before the Naked Gun movies, he was the guard in the Towering Inferno in 1976
I forgot
or something like that.
Yes, that's true.
But even if you didn't know what O.J.'s future held in the years that he was on Monday Night Football, he didn't offer anything. And when we were talking about the great color analysts of the Monday Night Football era, they all offered something special. And I don't think that O.J. or Alex or Namath did any of those. So those would be three that I would add to your Dennis Miller absolute lock.
Okay. I'm trying to do this from craning my neck around, so forgive me for looking away, but I wanted to get a picture up. I think this is it right here. Let's see if that's the photo. Oh no, sorry, that's the wrong one. Of course I got the wrong photo.
Well, that's Alex Carris.
Yeah, that's Carris, but I wanted to get, sorry, now I'm out of order here, so that's my fault. Oh well. So anyway, let me go back to where we were. Oh yeah, there we go. There's the photo I wanted. Yeah, that's when, can you imagine, by the way, this has got to be your worst nightmare, Mayor Paul Harris, Namath and O.J. Simpson in the booth together.
Yes, and I will point out, this is 3 ex-jocks. There's not a single person from the world of broadcasting in that picture.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, Frank Gifford earned his way into being able to be called a broadcaster over the years. I think he was on in some form or fashion on Monday Night Football for 27 years, and certainly deserved that. But I have a certain bias as a 40-year broadcaster myself. When you think, let's get people who have played the game before you think about people who can call the game.
All right, good point. Let's move on to, this is my top. I want to do top 10, but let's just do top 9. We're going to fight on this one. And by the way, I'm starting to change my opinion because I have a professional broadcaster here giving me, really some very, very interesting feedback that maybe I'll have to scrap some of this and edit this tape later on. But anyway, I like
no, don't edit it. You're allowed to disagree with me.
Okay. Anyway, I liked Joe Theismann. If I could get the slide up. Whoops, that's the wrong one. I'm completely all over the place here. By the way, I'm going to be the worst Zoomcaster in history. So you can send in your comments there about how bad my Zoomcasting is. The problem is I should show you this setup about how antiquated I am, but I'm trying to get pictures up of. There we go, Joe Theismann. There we go. Hello, Joe. Anyway, here's why I like Joe Theismann. First of all, he wasn't afraid to express an opinion. Now, you didn't like him. A lot of people hated Joe Theismann. Notre Dame, Washington Redskins. He'd always spike the ball and put it in your face when he'd score. And, he was a very polarizing figure. I think that actually is a positive thing in the broadcast booth. Clearly, the man could speak well. I thought his knowledge of the game, the man's an NFL quarterback, okay? So I thought that it didn't last that long in the booth, but I always thought Theismann actually was a little underrated as a broadcaster. That's probably a minority opinion, but you've already told me you don't like Theismann, so I'll give you the final word on this one.
Well, I liked Theismann when he was a guest on my radio show, and he would come on and have a sense of humor, but again, putting him in the booth with his arch enemy, Tony Kornheiser, that was some exec's mistake. And Theismann got fired before Kornheiser did. And I don't really have a recollection of what he was doing on the show, other than it never sounded like there was chemistry.
Yeah.
I've been the part of ensemble radio shows many, many times. I've done solo shows and ensemble shows. If you're in an ensemble and the people don't get along, don't go to work.
Yeah, sure enough.
It's bad.
Well, we don't know whose fault that was in that situation, but this next one is one that I think you're going to say should be ranked higher. I have a number 8. By the way, I could see him being ranked number 2 or 3 or 4. I can see that argument. My thing is he wasn't on the air, I don't think, that long. I thought very straight-laced, very, very, kind of like just the facts, ma'am, a stoic delivery, a very strong presence. Not much more than that, but again, that's his shtick, and I always respected it. So he did make my top 10 list, but I don't have him as high as you do, Paul Harris. Mike Tirico, I'm speaking.
I have him in my top 10 list, and if we were making a list of just the play-by-play guys, I think Mike Tirico would be probably 3rd or 4th on my list.
Okay. And we've already discussed this one. Let me tell you why I liked Carris, because I think the story behind why Carris was signed is important here. We're going to get to Donna Meredith in a moment. I've already tipped, who's in my top 10. And again, these are really polarizing choices. But Donna Meredith in 70, I think he joined the broadcast team in 70 or 71. It was 1970, actually. And then about 3 or 4 years later, just like you said, NBC offered him a lot of money to come over there. So he jumped ship, and I think he worked with Curt Cowdy, who was, in my view, one of the best NFL announcers of all time, Curt Cowdy of NBC. So I thought that him and Cowdy were very good together. So he left Monday Night Football. He also got a television show with NBC, and he wanted to be a movie star. His son's, by the way, is a film director. So, I mean, he has that, whatever that desire is. But anyway, they were looking, Monday Night Football, Roone Arledge was looking for somebody, kind of that person from the Midwest, or, somebody that would just neutralize, I guess is the right word, Cosell, who was in the booth. And so, well, who do you have at that time? Well, probably a lot of interesting characters, because if you look back in the days of the early 70s, the NFL's full of characters, right? Well, I think Alex Character was a character. Now, maybe he didn't come across that well. I know you've already trashed him. But I think, again, the signing of Carris, I think I completely understand. I mean, he's just kind of this good old boy schlub that just kind of goes along with the show. I'm not sure I remember ever saying anything that was that profound. I'll give you that. But I think, again, he's there to, this acidic porridge of dynamite. He's there to neutralize it a little bit, and he certainly did that. I'll give you the final word on Alex Carris.
Oh, I've already had everything I want to say about Alex Carris.
Okay. All right, the next one here, Dandy Don Meredith, Dallas Cowboys. He was out of football in 1969 and sat around for about a year selling as a stockbroker. And then all of a sudden he gets a call from ABC. Hey, you want to be a Monday Night Football on this new show? You want to be an announcer? And Dandy Don always had a personality. If you read any of the great books on 1960s NFL, Don Meredith is just a remarkably beloved, profound figure. I can see why he was hired. Again, this is not the guy that's going to give you this great analysis, but again, as a personality and a yin and a yang kind of a figure to Cosell and certainly Frank Gifford in the booth, I thought he played his role well. He played his role to perfection. He was who he was, and people, half the country at least, loved him. Probably half the country hated him, but that's the reason that people watch Monday Night Football. So I'm going to put Don Meredith in this. There's one more other point that I'll make before I throw it back to you, Paul. I'm not sure a person like Donna Meredith gets hired today. Those are very different times, and people were hired for different reasons. They could say things and get away with things that maybe you couldn't get away with given the way society is today. So I really like kind of this. It was kind of edgy. You never knew what was going to come out of his mouth next. And so for that reason, I put Don Meredith number 6 or 7 here.
I don't know that half the country ever hated Don Meredith. I don't remember him as being a Cosell-like figure. And he was a calming factor in the booth. And where Cosell was the erudite guy, Don Meredith came off as just the regular guy. Nobody in the history of broadcast football, cable, TV, Sunday, Monday, Saturday, whatever night of the week you want to choose, no one in the history of broadcast football has ever been better at saving a dog game.
Well, that's a great line. What do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean, but give us more on that, Paul.
It's the fourth quarter, and the Browns and the Bengals are fighting to a 3-3 tie, where it's just been 1-2-3 punt, 1-2-3 punt for the entire time. Boring football game. You were probably happy because you bet the under, but everybody else was bored by what they were watching. And Don Meredith would just say things that kept you entertained. When even Howard Cosell couldn't come up with something interesting to say, Don Meredith can do that. And by the way, he also was great at runaway games. It would be 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and he's in the booth singing, "Turn out the lights," because the Giants are down by 5 touchdowns. He was so good at being the one in the booth who knew the game well, but also was very entertaining to listen to, and the perfect counterpart to Howard Cosell.
Wow, I'm shocked that you, again, as a professional broadcaster, rate him so high. I wasn't expecting that. Kind of glad to hear that. And you're absolutely correct about these announcers, and particularly someone like Meredith, who could save a game. One of the most famous ones is at the Cotton Bowl. If you see the picture there, that's the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. And Dallas was losing 38-0 on Monday Night Football to your St. Louis Cardinals. Jim Hart was a quarterback. I remember the game. 1970. I was 8 years old. And the ratings, they found out the ratings went up. Usually games like that, people flick off the TV. Game's over. Why do you watch it? Well, it was because of the banter between the announcers. Don Meredith was a Cowboy fan, was cheering for the Cowboys in the booth and was going wild, like, what the hell is going on? I mean, he was saying that on the air. And so people just love that. And, you had real people in the booth with real emotions. And I think you're absolutely right. That was, I'd forgotten that 1970 game until you pointed out about that. So very good, Paul. I appreciate that. Let's move on.
Think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right that no broadcast outlet would hire him today, because you would not be allowed to do exactly what you just mentioned.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Ron Jaworski, I think, is just a pro, just a consummate pro. Back to his day, I think he did the ESPN, a lot of analytical shows, studio guy mostly, but he's also done on-air, I think, color commentary. Did it for only 3 seasons. short 3 seasons. Obviously, this is the old Philadelphia Eagles quarterback, the Polish rifle, they used to call him when he was with the Eagles. But what a transition to football. And I think I think he's just one of the very best in the business, whatever role he plays, color, an analyst, he can do it all. I'm a big fan of Ron Jaworski.
I am too. I think he may have been brought in to replace Theismann. I think that was that era. I can't remember. But I will tell you this. If Ron Jaworski's talking football, you better listen, because this guy knows what he's talking about. And as good as he was in the booth, and it was only for a year or two, he's been even better on ESPN whenever they're doing highlight packages.
Yeah.
And, they're using their graphics to show you how this player is moving here and this player is going here. Everything's lit up. You don't need any of that fancy digital stuff when Jaworski's talking, because he can put it in plain language and explain to you what's about to happen or what just did happen. Really good at the job.
I completely agree. And by the way, I'm going to give a shout out, even though she's not on this, Susie Kolber. I like Susie Kolber and Jaworski on analytics are just right there. And Kolber she knows what she's talking about, and they play off each other very, very well. So complete agreement on that one. Move on to this is not an announcer that most people associate with Monday Night Football, but he was on the broadcast for a few years, the lovable, great John Madden. And obviously CBS is where you think of John Madden's home with his counterpart, Pat Sumrall. For so many years, they called so many playoff games and Super Bowls. But he was in the booth with Al Michaels. It was one of the few years I think 2 or 3 years, they did just 2 people in the booth because, you have Al Michaels and John Madden, who's going to compete with those two. So I think he certainly belongs here. I have him number 4. What do you think, Paul?
I liked John Madden for many of his years at CBS, and then he went to Fox with Pat Sumrall when Fox stole the package away and started doing NFL games. They were the big signing, almost as big as getting football was getting Sumrall and Madden to be the number 1 team. They were very good together. Michaels and Madden also very good together. When he went to do Sunday night games, when the 2 of them went to do Sunday night games on NBC, by that point, he was starting to become a little bit of a parody of himself. In fact, I used to make fun of him in the last couple of Fox years, because as good as Donna Meredith was at keeping you tuned in to a boring game, John Madden just started circling things on his telestrator that were, hey, look, here's a guy with a hat. Okay. I mean, that was the level of commentary you were getting out of him. I don't know if he had done it so long he was bored. He did perk up a little bit when he got onto Monday Night Football, and then on the big Sunday night show, he and Michaels continued to have great chemistry. There's no way I would not put John Madden in the top 5 all time, but there were a few years there with Sumrall where if you can go back and watch some of those tapes, I used to record the games on Sunday afternoon, watch them, and then take those tapes and edit down to the parts where John Madden was just being stupid. There were times when he was just stupid. He was a brilliant tactician, knew a lot about football, was good about it. But once they started to go to handing out 6 turkey legs on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I give you that. Yeah. I don't know if that
and
was
the horse trailer.
By the way, real quick, Paul, I don't know if that was John Madden's fault. That could have been the network saying, hey, we need to, make it, you know how that goes. It's possible.
Okay.
And I lost my other feed, so I apologize. Let me see if I can get this back. Give me a second here while I can see if I can get my technical wizardry.
Okay, while you're doing that, yeah. I'm going to talk about somebody who I bet is not on your list.
Go ahead.
And I think people overlook him because he was only on Monday Night Football for maybe 1 season or 2. And that is Dan Fouts. Mm-hmm. Dan Fouts had the bad luck to be the color analyst who was sitting next to Dennis Miller when he was in the booth. And most of the time, I'm sure Dan Fouts was turning to his side and saying in his head, what the hell are you talking about? Let's talk about football. And as Dan Fouts has proven in his years on CBS, where he's the color analyst with Ian Eagle, they are the number 2 team on CBS, and I think they are much better than the number one team of Jim Nantz and the, can you tell me anything more obvious? Now I'm blanking. The former Troy Aikman. No, Troy Aikman, I'm sorry, is on with Joe Buck. But whoever it is who's on with Jim Nantz, not that good. And Fouts, very, very good. Ian Eagle and Dan Fouts deserve to be the number one team. And he was also very good in that very short stint on Monday Night Football. Maybe not a top tenor, but somebody who I think deserves a little honorary mention.
I appreciate you putting him in, because had he been on longer than just 2 seasons, I probably would have, had him on. In fact, he probably belongs in Carris's place. So you talked me into that one. Let me yank out Alex Carris and put in Dan Fouts. Hell of a quarterback, and also an excellent announcer. I agree. I apologize for losing my imagery, but I don't think we're going to need pictures on the last 3, my top 3 here. Everyone remembers who they are, who they were in some cases. Frank Gifford, number 3 in my view, was not a professional broadcaster, the old New York Giant fullback or halfback, and transitioned into a football announcer. I think he really grew into the role, and he was there for more than 20 seasons, a lot of different personalities to micromanage. Really not the best play-by-play guy. In fact, I remember reading Howard Cosell's books, and he absolutely eviscerated Frank Gifford as a play-by-play guy. But I think he did an adequate job. But I think he was just the glue that held that whole team together. So Frank Gifford has to be on anyone's, in their top 5. I think you agree.
I do. I got to go back. Jim Nantz works with Tony Romo as the number 1 CBS team. Right. They're great, and they should not be replaced. And I was thinking about Joe Buck and Troy Aikman. They did the last Super Bowl, and we had friends over our house to watch it with us. And I said, let's count the number of times Troy Aikman tells you something that's so obvious he didn't need to say it. We got past 25 and we stopped counting in one game. I agree with everything you say about Frank Gifford. Interesting thing, he was not the original play-by-play guy on Monday Night Football. That was Keith Jackson, who later went on to, or starting the next year, went over to college football and had a legendary career. Whoa, Nelly! For all those years. Interesting little bit of trivia for you. Do you know who Rune Arledge wanted for that job as the original play-by-play guy?
The original play-by-play guy on Monday Night Football, who would Rune Arledge have wanted? No, I don't know.
You've already mentioned him here today. He couldn't get him because he had an NBC contract, Kurt Cowdy.
Oh, Kurt Cowdy, okay.
And his second choice, and he couldn't get him because he had an NBC contract, was Vin Scully. And his third choice was someone well known to everybody here in St. Louis, Jack Buck, who did end up having a wonderful career with CBS and, of course, called the Cardinals games here for decades. Jack Buck said, it's on ABC. They screwed me. I'm never doing a deal with ABC. And so he was out. And so that's how they ended up with Keith Jackson. I will say, those 3 I just mentioned are Hall of Famers. I think Keith Jackson is too. The fact that he was yanked out of the booth in favor of Frank Gifford is just one of those odd little quirks of broadcast history. Yeah,
it's interesting. I didn't realize that. And I would also talk about ABC announcers, John McKay. John McKay was the voice of
Jim
ABC.
McKay.
Jim McKay, excuse me. The voice of ABC Sports in the early 70s, Wide World of Sports. And if you remember that, he did of course, very famous for the 1972 Munich games and announcing that massacre, and just had this, just this perfect delivery and presence. And I'd like to have seen him in that role. He would have been phenomenal, I think.
But if you're going to have 2 wacky people in the booth, in the body of Donna Meredith and the hairpiece of Howard Cosell, you got to have a straight man. Yeah. And Frank Gifford was the straight man who kept that thing together and kept the formatics of the broadcast going. Not an easy thing to do, I can tell you from my own history. There's a lot of stuff that you got to do as the front man in a booth. And Frank Gifford was so what a life.
Yeah. We lost just a little piece of what you said there, Paul, but I know what you're saying from your broadcast days, and you used to come in right after, I believe, Howard Stern. So you know of what you speak, sir.
No, actually, Howard and I were never on the same radio station.
Oh, okay. You were in the same time slot, though. Was that what it was?
Yes, we competed. We
Yeah.
competed against each other.
Right. So I won't ask who won that one, but
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on, shall we? Don't leave me, Paul. I didn't mean to yank the plug there. All right, my number 2. Although you could just put any one of these people, 1, 2, 3. They're all pretty much interchangeable. I think number 1's easy. But Al Michaels, I think, deserves number 2 at least. Just ever since 1980. Do you believe in miracles in the ice hockey calling where he kind of that's where he made his chops. And then he comes in, he was a baseball guy. People they think of him as a football guy, but Al Michaels always loved baseball. And ABC used to have baseball, Monday Night Baseball. And Al Michaels was there. And he transitioned into, I think, a very strong football announcer and just gives those little quips. For example, if you're a gambler, and he's always making references late in the game to the totals and the spreads that are, this is when the NFL didn't like that kind of thing. Just the way he talks between the lines, I think he's got a lot of panache, a lot of sophistication. I'm a big Al Michaels fan. I think everybody is, yeah?
I think indisputably the greatest multi-sport play-by-play person of all time. We just talked about Cowdy, Scully, and Buck. They are amongst the greatest baseball announcers of all time. Al Michaels has done not just baseball at World Series level, but also all these years of primetime football. I talked about Frank Gifford being great with the formatics. Al Michaels is great with it too. But also there's something special about Al Michaels, and that is I believe that every season before the first kickoff, Al Michaels somehow memorizes the entire NFL rulebook. Because when something happens on the field, they don't really need to turn to their NFL rules official, which every network now has, because Al Michaels knows what happened there and what it means, that ball fumbled out of the end zone is going to be a touchback, or this thing that happened, some little minute thing. He knows on page 62, subparagraph 3B, there was a little thing he read about this, and he can bring it up. And he said, when we watch the replay, watch for this. And sure enough, there it is. He also, I think, is paired with the best color commentator, I think you could say, since John Madden, when it comes to analyzing the game. We haven't really talked about Chris Collinsworth in this at all, and I think he deserves top 5 status, certainly top 5, maybe even top 3 color analyst status. I love the way he analyzes the game. I know for a fact that he goes home every week and spends the entire week watching all the games, making notes about them, even for teams that he's not going to be broadcasting, and he getting insights into how teams play, what they do, what coaches make what decisions at what times. And he is like Tony Romo on CBS, and I think Romo learned this from Collinsworth. He is able to tell us more often what is probably going to happen and not just wait for, oh yeah, well, that ball got into the end zone, so that's a touchdown.
All right.
That's what I call the Dick Stockton call.
Yeah, that's excellent on Collinsworth. I'm going to get to Collinsworth in a moment. By the way, this is obviously unrehearsed, so I'm going to throw you a curveball here. My number 1 should be obvious. Maybe I'll get to that in a moment. But do you have a top 3 or 5 list, Paul, on your own here?
Well, I think we've mentioned most of them. For play-by-play people, I think Al Michaels, Keith Jackson, Frank Gifford, Mike Tirico. I think for analysts, he who shall be named in a moment, Donna Meredith. I think Frank Gifford goes into this as well, because after a while, when Michaels was in the number 1 chair, Gifford moved over to the number 2 chair and did a pretty good job as an analyst. And then Madden and Gooden and Fouts would be in there, and no one named Carris.
Okay. By the way, yeah, go ahead.
Let me add one more. And this is a guy who, he's not at the top of the list or the bottom of the list, but there were a lot of people who either liked him or really hated him in the last few years. And that's a guy named Booger McFarland. I would have bet a lot of money that you could not have a career in broadcasting with the name Booger. but he has, and he's pretty good. I think you and I talked about this recently off the air. There was one season that ESPN decided to put Booger McFarland in a seat that was on the same vehicle that transports the sideline camera up and down. You know, from whatever sideline they're shooting the game, the camera that goes at the line of scrimmage is not often a high up camera, but it's often a camera that's right there. There are rails along the sideline of the field. I don't know if you've ever been to a field where there's a game being televised, but there are rails, and this thing chugs along on that. It's pushed along by grips, union guys who are moving that thing up and down, and they take the shot. Well, one year, maybe just a couple of seasons ago, an ESPN exec said, let's put Booger in a chair right next to that camera, and so he'll have that special perspective. We've never had an announcer give that perspective. Here's the problem. From that perspective, you can't see as much as you can when you're in the booth up in the loge of the stadium. You can't see as well what the layout is of the offense, of the defense, etc. So he was really reduced to only talking about what the linemen did or where the wide receivers lined up, you know, in the slot or out wide, and adding things from that perspective. It didn't work, which is why I think they abandoned it about halfway through the season. It wasn't his fault, and it wasn't the fault of what he was saying. It was where the executive decided to put him. He's now off the broadcast and back in the studio as an ABC in-studio analyst, and quite often has some interesting things to say, but he'll, I think, forever be considered an asterisk in the history of Monday Night Football, Booger McFarland.
Well, some nice words for Booger there. Excellent. One thing before we go to my number one, and perhaps yours too, Chris Collinsworth just gets beat up so badly on social media, on football chat forums, all of that. I don't understand the hatred for Chris Collinsworth. You've already talked about, I think, what a fine analyst is. I also like his delivery. He's got just the right tone, and he gets excited, I think, at the right moments, and brings a lot to the game. Why is there so much hate for Chris Collinsworth in your view?
Anybody who shares strong opinions is going to find that there are people who disagree with them, and the ones who disagree with you are the ones who respond most vehemently.
Yeah.
Very few people in the world say, hey, I like that guy, and just, I'm going to call the network and let them know, or email the network, or tweet the network, or write something about it on Facebook about how much I like this guy who I listen to. But God forbid you say something that they disagree with. Well, now you have all of Facebook and all of Twitter.
Like bad restaurant reviews on Yelp, I guess. Similar thing. You don't. Hey, that was an average meal. Let me go ahead and write a review. You know. Very
right.
True. Yeah. Number one, easy. This is a slam dunk. There'll never be another person that will match this man's mastery of language in the moment, adding drama just by his presence in the room and in the broadcast booth. A man who transcended the game, transcended football, transcended sports. Was not just a journalist, but was a social force. And that's obviously Howard Cosell. Howard Cosell's broadcast career goes back into the New York media market in the 1960s. He took a lot of brave stands that were not popular there when he was, known as a regional broadcaster. And he was a very controversial figure when he came on to Monday Night Football. And if those of you who are a bit younger and don't understand how profound Howard Cosell was, you have to think of football. There were only 3 networks or 4 or 5 networks at the time if you had local television. So everyone watched Monday Night Football. The nuclear family watched the game together. And the next day, when you went to the water cooler at work, you talked about what Howard Cosell said, what thing Howard Cosell said that drove everybody crazy, and how Donna Meredith whacked him back with some great line, and maybe you'll talk about the game, the 27-21 football game. They were talking about the announcers. That's how big these guys were, like rock stars going around the country. I'm talking about Donna Meredith, Frank Gifford, and Howard Cosell. It was the perfect. It was almost, if you're a rock and roll fan, it was almost it was the Beatles in the sense of you have four distinct personalities that just fit perfectly into this band. And Howard Cosell was easily number one in Monday Night Football history and maybe even sports broadcasting history. Paul Harris, what do you think?
Aside from Roone Arledge, who was the visionary who put together the package that became Monday Night Football and decided that these guys should get hired. Aside from Roone Arledge, no one has been more important in the history of Monday Night Football than Howard Cosell. In the very first season they were on the air, people already had formed such strong opinions about Howard Cosell that local bars that were showing the game would have contests allowing people to throw a brick at the TV. And if you hit Howard Cosell, you won $100 or free drinks or something like that. I don't think that many of them used actual bricks because TVs were expensive.
No, they were made of sponges. You threw a sponge.
Yeah, they were foam. Anybody who can engender that kind of reaction from an audience that tuned in specifically to hear what Howard Cosell had to say. It did not matter who was playing in the game for a lot of people on most Monday nights. When I talked before about the hardcore football person versus the casual fan, the casual fans tuned in to watch that. If you were usually the kind of guy whose wife wouldn't even talk to you on Sunday afternoons because you were watching football for hour upon hour, on Monday nights, she would probably sit down with you and she didn't even care about the game. She just wanted to hear what this outrageous man was saying on television. Now, I do want to just compare this to another very controversial, very opinionated broadcaster in this country who many people think had a role on Monday Night Football, but he never did. His name is Rush Limbaugh. There was a time where the network went to him in the ESPN years, not ABC. ESPN went to him and was going to offer him the opportunity to be on the Monday night games. They would pay for him to fly to wherever the games were and then a special private jet to take him back so he could do his syndicated radio show again the next day. But when word got out about that, so many advertisers told ESPN, we won't have anything to do with it if Rush is on the show, that they kind of changed the contract a little bit and never put him on Monday Night Football. Instead, he was on, what's it called? Sunday Night Countdown on ESPN back in 2003. He lasted all of 4 weeks on that show before he said something stupid and arguably racist about Donovan McNabb, who was the quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles at that time. Limbaugh did not have the thing that Cosell had, which was the ability to also be loved, except by the people who were his extreme right-wing radio fans. The rest of America, the 90% of America that never listened to Rush Limbaugh, didn't know what Rush Limbaugh did for a living. Everybody knew what Howard Cosell did for a living. Everybody wanted to hear what Howard Cosell was going to say. Even if they disagreed with him 100% of the time, Nolan, they wanted him. And only Howard Cosell could have handled telling the nation that John Lennon had been murdered on that night of December 8th, 1980, in the way that he did. You know, the first thing he said, football is just a game. This is the real world. What? You're on the highest rated program on your television network, which is about covering a game, and you're just telling people, hey, this is just a game. There's bad things happening in the world. And then he told people that John Lennon was dead. That was a shock to the country. And Cosell had the know-it-all to handle it just right. He also had interviewed John Lennon 6 years earlier on Monday Night Football. And here's another little piece of trivia. There was another guest in the booth that night by the name of Ronald Reagan, who at the time was not the president, wasn't the governor anymore. He was just Ronald Reagan. And he was in the booth, and Frank Gifford did that interview. And Howard Cosell, who was pretty hip to pop culture, did the John Lennon interview. And so I think that's why you heard the little drop in his voice when he announced Lennon's murder on that December night in 1980. He was one of a kind, and he absolutely deserves to be in the number one slot. In fact, I think you might have to drop everybody else down, and the second place person would actually be in third place because Cosell holds such a huge part of number one.
Very, very well said. I'd like to say one more thing on Cosell and then get your closing thoughts on him about how his career ended and how sad that was, because a broadcast legacy that went 25, 30 years, all the things you go back and there's a number of books written on Cosell's career, but he was a political figure. He fought for Ali, and when I say fought for him, I mean legally speaking. This was this was not a popular stand to take, okay? And
Right.
and Howard Cosell leaves broadcasting. Was already burned out, say, by I think 84, 85, whatever year it was, when he was on Monday Night Football. You're a Washington guy. You remember probably when he made just an offhand remark about an African-American wide receiver and called him a little monkey or something. Look at him moving like a little monkey, something that was really innocent. And if you know Howard Cosell's politics and how he's fought for racial equality and civil rights going back into the 1960s, I think, couldn't we cut the man a little bit of slack? Isn't that the one guy that probably deserves a little bit of slack? So the way that he went out, and then he was a very bitter man the final few years of his life, it's really, really sad. And the reason I want to spend a little extra time on Cosell and give you the final word here is because, unfortunately, people remember that moment, and they shouldn't. There's so much more.
I agree. Did you ever see the clip of him calling another player a little monkey?
Go ahead. I don't know. I guess not.
The player's name was Mike Adamle, and he was as white as you and I.
Oh, okay. So,
and Cosell used to say, Cosell used to say, I was talking about the crazy way his legs moved. It's the same thing I say to my grandchildren.
Yeah.
And 2 seasons before, he had said it about Mike Adamle. I don't think that there was a racial intent in what he said, but it was one of those times. Can you imagine it now with our cancel culture?
Yeah.
He would have been off the show even faster than he was back then.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right, Paul. Go ahead. Sorry.
One more thing to remember about Cosell. He narrated the highlights during halftime. Now, when Monday Night Football went on the air in 1970 and throughout most of that decade, there was no place for you and me to see highlights of other NFL games other than the ones that were on in our local market. If you wanted to see what happened between the Packers and the Bears, and you didn't live in Green Bay or Chicago, you might be able to read about it in Sports Illustrated. You might be able to see the score, but you were not going to be able to see any clips of what happened in there. Roone Arledge, again, the visionary, said, we're going to put together a 3-minute clip, a 3-minute package that shows the highlights from this weekend. And Cosell ad-libbed his way through the highlights based on a simple cue sheet he was given by a production assistant. It was great, and people stuck around through halftime for that.
People used to get mad if their team wasn't featured on the highlights.
Yes.
I mean, I'm serious. It was that big of a deal. I mean, there were 30 million people were watching the halftime highlights. Imagine that. So, well said about Howard Cosell. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just mention a couple of other things?
Yes, sir.
About this? We weren't going to talk about the people who were not in the broadcast booth, but I do want to mention 2 people who I think set the standard for sideline reporters. Every network now has sideline reporters. Local stations have somebody covering it. ESPN has somebody at every game. Every broadcast has somebody on the sidelines. They don't offer anything interesting. I talked to the coach as he was going to the locker room. I asked him what he had to do in the second half, and he said, we have to play better and win.
Yeah, eye candy, too. That's the spot for eye candy. Yeah.
Yes, but there are 2 women who changed that job because they were so good at it, and they are Leslie Visser and Michelle Tafoya, who is still doing it to this day.
Right.
Leslie Visser set the standard for a long, long time, and Michelle Tafoya has stepped into her shoes very nicely. And then the other thing I wanted to mention to you is when we're talking about the history of Monday Night Football, and I didn't know this until I read it earlier today, Do you know that between 1995 and 2005, which was the last decade that ABC had the games, they lost money. They lost millions of dollars broadcasting Monday Night Football because people were bored with it. The announcers in the booth weren't a singular draw the way they had been in the first couple of decades. The games, well, maybe the games were just as good. I can't remember. But the rights fees that ABC had to pay to the National Football League were so high that they lost money on it. And here's the interesting thing. When ABC said goodbye to that because because NBC made a deal for Sunday Night Football, which used to be on ESPN, you may remember. ESPN then took over Monday Night Football. They have made millions on those games. And you wonder, well, how can ESPN, a cable outfit, make more money on this than ABC, a broadcast outfit? And the answer is in the carriage fees that the cable networks get. ESPN gets so much money for all the subscribers that there are across the country that helps raise the bottom line big time. So ESPN's Monday Night Football, it's the biggest thing on cable every week, and it's certainly the biggest moneymaker in the ESPN stable.
Excellent. Didn't know that. I never knew why, although I think Disney owns both ESPN and ABC, I never knew why it left ABC, which again, if you don't have cable TV or a satellite dish, you'd have to subscribe, I guess, whatever that word means anymore in television.
Or hope to see it on your local station there. You know, they do put it on the local broadcast channels in the home markets of the two teams that are playing. And I'll also point out that in those 14, 15 seasons since ESPN took it over, they have every week gotten the dregs of the league. I mean, look who we had last night. Pittsburgh versus the Giants, a team that last season was just barely over 500, and a team that was just barely over 300. And then the Titans and the Broncos, these are mediocre NFL teams. There's no Tom Brady, Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers games getting put into Monday night on a regular basis. They're getting a lot of Jacksonville Jaguar games. The only time ESPN is not the worst game of the week is when NFL Network has a Thursday game.
And those have been notoriously bad for a long time.
The fact that they make all this money on but just mediocre games, middle of the league kind of games, says a lot considering they used to get the best games of the week.
Very well said. I'll make the final point here about how to make Monday Night Football better, maybe return to the glory days of Meredith, Cosell, and Gifford, although you can't really go back to that time. I'm going to go back to something that you said, Paul Harris, at the top of the show, and that's that making Monday Night Football a party again. Here's my idea. I've never shared this with anyone. I wrote a column on it but never printed it because I thought it was a very powerful idea. So for the very first time, I'm going to share it with you and the viewers because I think I'm just right on this. In fact, I know I'm right about this. I've watched this 50 years. How do you jumpstart the Monday Night Football broadcasting booth? Well, here's my view. I don't really care who you have, the play-by-play person and the color person, but here's who the third person should be. I think it should be a guest seat, a guest rotation of celebrities. When I say celebrities, I mean someone that's known. I don't mean Hollywood necessarily. But I mean, if, for example, every week you go to a new city, and Monday Night Football goes to a new city. I'm just going to pull these names out of the sky that gives you some idea of, I think, how to make the broadcast booth more interesting, bring in viewers who are non-football fans who want to watch this, where they'll talk about it again at the water cooler the next day, where, maybe there'll be some controversy, maybe they'll say something stupid, but they're going to watch, and we're going to have some fun, and it's going to be a party. You have a celebrity in the third spot, and you change it every single week. When you go to New Orleans, bring in Bradford Marsalis or Harry Connick Jr. In Washington, bring in former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. She's a huge NFL fan. She'd fly into Washington and do that game. In Cleveland, ask LeBron James to come in and do a Browns game. I got the Browns stadium behind me. Listen, I don't care if you like LeBron James or not. But I tell you what, he loves football, and he'd probably do it. It's the off season. In Tennessee, I'm making this up. You're going to laugh. You think, oh, there's no way they'll do it. Or I think they would do it. In Tennessee, ask Dolly Parton or a country western singer that people know to do a Tennessee Titans game. How cool would that be? Chicago, John Belushi. Let's get John Belushi in the booth. He loves football as a Bears fan.
Not John.
That's fantastic.
You're going to have to get
I meant Jim Belushi.
Yeah.
Jim Belushi. So how about in New York? Yeah,
If you got John Belushi, that would be the highest rated Monday night game of all time.
That's true. Listen, I'm on a roll here. No notes. Spike Lee in New York. Or in New York, you could get anybody. You could get so many different people in New York. I could go on and on. Pittsburgh. Christina Aguilera is from Pittsburgh. She's a Steeler fan. I mean, tell me if the ratings wouldn't go. I understand they have contract obligations, maybe some conflicts, with their schedules, but you let it know the beginning of the season, here's our lineup. People are going to watch that, man. And especially if you bring in, because this is kind of an older person's topic. Bring in some hot, young, hip people to come in, get Jay-Z to sit there in Monday Night Football. I guarantee you the ratings go through the roof. You have a lot of fun, and you get back to maybe that spirit of a Monday night party. What do you think of my idea?
Well, I would have to add a caveat. They would have to understand it's not about them. They're not coming in just to be interviewed about their new project.
Oh, sure.
I don't want to see Seth Rogen sitting there at a LA Chargers game talking about his new movie that he's got out on Netflix or whatever it is. It's got to be somebody who's reasonably into football. They don't have to be expert level, but reasonably into football to the point where they want to be there, where they've gone to games before, where they know what they're watching, where they can talk about it with some intelligence at some point. And they don't even have to chime in on every game. But if they do, put them in the booth and let them raise their finger if it's time for them to say something, so that whoever the new play-by-play guy is, Steve Levy, I think is his name. By the way, calm down, Steve. You don't have to shout the entire night like you did during the Titans-Broncos game last night. I know you're excited. It's your first game, but take a chill pill before you go on the air. But if he's the guy who's going to be the traffic cop of the team, the guests just put their finger up because they want to say something, and then hopefully they say something intelligent. But then it's okay if 10 minutes go by and they don't say anything.
Yeah. Well, I think of you see Matthew McConaughey, who's a huge University of Texas graduate, Cowboy fan, maybe the Texans. I mean, if he goes on that broadcast and he's in the booth openly cheering for the Texans, who's got a problem with that, right? It's Matthew McConaughey. Right. Or any again, I use Harry Connick Jr. from New Orleans, or Bradford Marsalis, or a musician, or, a rapper, anybody. I just think that this would create – it'd be fun again. It'd be fun. It'd be something to watch. And, man, I think everybody would look forward to it. And there'd be some of them that would be flops, and you'd hate it. But you know what? When's the last time, Paul, or anybody out there listening to me now, that you said, did you see what happened on Monday Night Football last night? And it wasn't game. Say it was related to the announcers. Did you hear what so-and-so said? I haven't done that in 15 or 20 years. I was screaming about Tony Kornheiser. So I'd like to see this come back to a party. I think that's how you do it. Have some fun.
Good idea.
All right. So this has been a great show. I really enjoyed, at least I enjoyed sitting here. I learned a lot about the history of Monday Night Football talking to Paul Harris. Paul, one last question for you. It's 2020. We take this we bury this tape, and we pull it out 10 years from now. Is there going to be Monday Night Football 10 years from now?
Yes, but it's going to only be one man in the booth, Alex Carris.
Okay. Oh, just to drive you crazy. I would love that. Well, they'll have to dig him up and put him next to John Belushi. Anyway, yeah. I'm Nolan Dalla for Pointspreads.ca. It's brought to you by a Canadian sports betting website, Spreads.ca. Got a lot of promotions now. We're in the beginning of the NFL season, and check it out, especially if you live in Canada. Got some hockey. The Stanley Cup playoffs are coming up. We're going to have a roundtable talk show about the Stanley Cup finals coming up probably tomorrow night or maybe Wednesday night. Anyway, I'm Nolan Dalla with Paul Harris, excellence in broadcasting, and really nice to have you as my guest. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul, and we'll see you next time here on Slapshot. Good night.